Hello, everyone here in YouTube land and all those who happen to watch. Hope you're doing quite well. It is Ghoulish Games 2023, where today I'm going to be recommending to you 5 games that I heavily recommend for the month of October. Of course, I could have done this much earlier during the month, but hey, there's a couple days left. If you can crunch them all in within the 31st, will be good. But without further ado, on to the first game. And the first game I recommend on this list is none other than one of my personal favorite cult favorites of all time, The Suffering. Now, The Suffering itself is, quite frankly, one of the more bizarre and beautiful games in its own right, with its own equal amount of jankiness to it. Now, you play as this, I'm using the quotations here very loosely here, inmate that Torque here, who you play as, is pretty much sentenced to life in prison. Now, obviously, it was supposedly because he murdered his wife and his children, but at the end of the day, we don't truly know the circumstance, at least not until we actually come to the bottom of it through playing through the game. And the game itself actually does open up a lot of great narration as well as a pretty killer story. Now, the atmosphere, I'm not normally scared of things too often when it comes to video games at all. Like, usually, spooky shit doesn't really bother me that much. But with this one, it does have a great set of atmosphere to it. Again, it does follow with the third person slash first person style of combat. So it was kind of like that time where third person shooters were very popular back in the day. It does offer, I would say, a good length of gameplay. The combat's pretty satisfying. The weapons and everything like that are your typical shotguns and all of that nature. And of course, you also morph into a hybrid mutant beast, which of course does wreak some havoc there. And again, some of the parts can be a little bit screwy, but otherwise it's simply a very enjoyable game. Now, honorable mention to the sequel, The Ties That Bind for The Suffering, but as far as it goes, the second game wasn't nearly as good as the first one, but the second one still is worth playing anyway if you can get these both in a bundle and either on Steam or on GOG. I'd probably recommend GOG a little bit more, only because it's the support as for the older games on there is a lot better. But then Steam's also kind of picking up their paces and making it a lot easier to play these games too. But without further ado, here's the second game. As number 2 will probably come no surprise to any one of my friends here who knows exactly what the game's probably going to come up next. But now there is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Now, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, it owes no introduction for those who are veterans to Castlevania, as well as the genre called Metroidvania. Though, of course, Metroid and probably a few other handful of games, of course, owe that notoriety for being one of the first of its type. However, Castlevania Symphony of the Night sort of set another standard for the type of genre as well. While Metroid may have taken the reins as being one of the first, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, in its own style, took the genre by storm, combining elements such as RNG for drop rates for weapons and simply having a marvelous and gorgeous soundtrack, which I can't really play here on Twitch or YouTube in this case. But at the same time, it is an absolutely phenomenal game I play almost every single year around this time. Simply because I love the game unconditionally, and it's one of my favorite games of all time, hands down. Now, it's across and available every single platform, probably exception to Steam, but at the same time, absolutely one of my favorite games. Like, it just... awesome game. Now, the story of it roughly is you're playing as Alucard, Dracula's son, and of course you're going through the castle to stop him and or sources that are causing more of a malice throughout the lands. Now, again, there's all kinds of unlockables as well as simply just being a hugely replayable game. Now, it doesn't have this replayability via like Binding of Isaac. However, it's just every once in a while you get that itch. You get that itch and you want to keep playing it. Now, for me personally, I can say this much about this game. As many of the games that are based off its genre, this is the number one I actually run back to all the time besides Super Metroid. Which Super Metroid is sort of like every other year I try to as well, but at the same time, I always humbly come back to Symphony of the Night because it's just a soundtrack. gameplay, just the dynamic elements of the game, the jankiness, the gorgeous, gorgeous sprite work, everything melded into this game is number one reason for me why the genre is so good as it is today. Besides Metroid, besides Super Metroid, this one, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the kings, or one of the many kings of the realms when it comes to the genre. But without further ado, let's get into the next game here on the list. Coming in number 3 is another one that's kind of a niche favorite of mine, and for many out there on the PC side of things, is definitely one of the more remarkable FMV-based games of modern time. It does have some light jank, but otherwise it is an absolutely incredible, incredible game, and that, of course, is Realms of the Haunting. Now, Realms of the Haunting is by far has some of the best FMV I've ever seen in a game for quite some time. Like and that tells you something. Like, the actual storyline with this game is freaking great. Like, it is really good. Now, once you get adjusted a little bit to the genre and some of the controls themselves are not the problem whatsoever either. Again, the game has some light jank where I said this before. Some of the enemies act kind of funky with their patterns, but you could easily overcome those, and it can also use this towards your advantage as well. It has really a good amount of time and play into it as well. It has a little bit of confusion via some of the solutions of some of the puzzles, as well. It does kind of blend into that whole Metroidvania style, like I was mentioning before. Has a light kiss of that. Otherwise, it's also very much like System Shock, if you want to notice that one too. And it's really by far one of my personal favorites of its genre. It's a mix of genres actually in this one. It's one part FPS and one part adventure game, and it's really well done in how its style is, because I haven't really seen too many games like it since. And nowadays, if you were to take this style of FMV and do a modern game with that, oh god, it'd be so good. But again, I think it's one of those once in a lifetime kind of games as well, along with these other games here as too. I mean, yes, we've gotten a good handful of Metroidvanias that have been very similar, if not almost, I'm saying almost, on par with Symphony of the Night. But at the same time, it's also a matter of taste, or in this case, a matter of execution. And I think easily Realms of the Haunting is one of those few games that's an absolute diamond in the rough, if you have never heard of it before. It's my personal favorite of one of my personal favorites on PC. And it goes up there on a huge, huge wall of notoriety for me, but for those who've never played and completed it before, it's an absolutely wonderful game. And the end of it gets a little bit crazy, yes, but you can also overcome it just the same too. It's a simple walkthrough as well. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, have fun with the game, right? But that again is number 3. Moving on to number 4. This is another one which was made more once in a lifetime in terms of the quality, as well as simply just being one of the more unique releases of all time. Not other not. I'm going to keep going with this. Why? Because this is my video. None other than Blood. So basically, Blood Fresh Supply is definitely one of the more unique titles of its genre as well, believe it or not. Now, it was based off the Build engine, which was the same exact one as Duke Nukem 3D, so a lot of people compare this one so much to that, it's crazy. However, this one is a huge nod to anything when it comes to horror films. Like, there's so many references in this game, it screams bloody murder, pardon the pun. But it has like so many references such as, you know, The Shining, Nightmare on Elm Street, The Thing. It pulses with so many different games and references and everything else tucked into this one, mostly popping into the pop culture references left and right and center. Has just a ton of them, like I could sit here all day bringing up all the ones, but it just screams and bleeds and just explodes at all those. The weapons in this game are also heavily explosive as well and imaginative. You start off with a flare gun instead of a regular pistol. You also start with a pitchfork, which I thought was pretty wild. The enemies in this game are also pretty ruthless as well. Depending what difficulty you play this on, it kicks the living dog crap out of you. But at the same time, once you get a little bit better and accustomed to the game, it becomes a really enjoyable experience. Now, of course, I'm referencing the fresh supply version of it because the modern quality of life improvements with the keyboard and mouse treatment, as well as it just plays a lot better that way in that version of the game. It's a more definitive version. So if you're trying to play the original one, there's nothing wrong with that. Just stick with this version if you're not even familiar with the game at all. It'll make it so much easier, especially if you're a person that keyboard and mouses everything in the universe. Trust me, you'll be happy you did. Otherwise, it's a really wonderful build game. It just screams machismo when it comes to just fun. Has a ton of content as well as custom maps, as well as just so many different expansions attached to this version of the game. You won't be bored for a very long time when it comes to playing this one here if you're into the horror-based FPS shooters. But let's get on to the last one and we'll wrap it up. The last but not least on this list. Now, a lot of people would probably say, well, how come Silent Hill 2 isn't on this list? How come Resident Evil 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 o'clock Rock is not on this list? Why isn't this on this list? At the end of the day, they're all wonderful games, such as even Dead Space 2, the new remake of Dead Space. All wonderful games, no argument from me, but at the end of the day, I want to try to keep things a little bit interesting as possible. That's why I went with this choice, and you probably wouldn't disagree with it if you probably played it. But, boop, Carrion. Now, this one right here is very interesting. Now, if you remember the movie The Thing, basically that in a nutshell. It's not a long game, but it's an enjoyable game. And it has a great amount of survival attached to it. Now, you play as a creature, or the Carrion here, or the Carrion. I can never say it correctly. The developers will flip it out when I couldn't say it right either. But no, basically, when I played this one originally, it was so good. So good. You play as a creature which eventually you evolve by consuming and eating people and all that. It's a cool little game that is worth your attention for sure. Now, you can get this on GOG, you can get this on Steam. It's a well-made game. It's very quick, but at the same time, usually if the discount price is right, also very enjoyable nonetheless for the price. But again, it's usually available in bundles as well. So again, if you could find it anyway, which way there. But otherwise, it's basically that in a nutshell. So you get to play as the monster. It's the exploration is pretty cool. You can go through air ducts, you go through open areas and just attack people, and it's fun. It's simple fun. It's enjoyable. The atmosphere is wonderful. It has like this blend of The Thing, The Blob, and Alien kind of rolled into one with that. Again, the art direction is really marvelous as well. It's like a blend of 3D and 2D at the same time. It's like 2.5D something or other. Like, it just blends itself together so wonderfully. And again, it just plays so well with a controller or keyboard and mouse. So again, whoever your preference of choice is there. But hey, that's the 5 games right here I'd recommend to you to try out on Halloween or this October season, or maybe next year if you're kind of late to the party when you see this video. But either which way, every single one of these games are worth your time and worth checking out. But hey, I'm Dan Van Dam. See you on Twitch, and see you next time.